Welcome to Pixel Focus, the podcast where we explore the positive connection between ADHD and video games, how they impact our lives, as well as the way we play. We're going to dive into the personal experiences with gaming and ADHD, as well as what research is uncovering about their relationship. Joining me today is Dr. Douglas Gentile, a distinguished professor of psychology at Iowa State University. He's a leading expert on how media and video games affect attention, development, and behavior. For more than 35 years, he's published over 150 peer-reviewed articles, authored books on media violence, video game effects, and how they can influence learning. Dr. Gentile, it is a great privilege. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Perfect. So for anyone who is not familiar with your work, can you tell us a bit about your background, your experience in the field? Has it ever dove into the research of ADHD?
Sure. Well, I'm a child psychologist. Yes, I know I look older. See, you come for the research, you stay for the dad jokes, right? Uh, so I study media's influences on children, adolescents, and adults. I study both what you might consider, positive effects, such as educational media, negative effects, media violence. I study what you would consider intentional effects, like advertising, and unintentional effects, like video game addiction. So if it has to do with media and children's health and wellness, I've probably done something on it. And yes, I have done a little bit on ADHD, but not specifically because I was interested in ADHD, really, and that's not my expertise. But what I found is parents would keep coming up to me and saying, "My kid's got ADHD, and the only thing he can pay attention to for 2 hours is video games." And I went, "Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Let's do some studies and find out."
Perfect.
And so we started to do a couple different studies looking at there were kids' video game habits and ADHD. And the short answer is when we look across time, that so doing longitudinal studies, following the same children for 6 months or 2 years in our studies, the kids who are consuming more video games at, say, time one, also there is a correlation with ADHD. ADHD kids certainly do like games, just like pretty much everyone else does, but I think they fit their cognitive style pretty well because they're constantly moving and jumping, right? So it is easier to maintain attention to something like that. The problem is what we find is a year or two later, if they've been playing more games or consuming other media, it's not just video games. We've also looked at TV and movies and things like that. But to the extent that kids are consuming more, their ADHD symptoms get worse over time. And that kind of answers the question, is it good? Is it bad? Yes, it fits the cognitive style and it can hold attention, but it's not actually helping. It's actually harming. And we don't know necessarily why. And here's my best guess. And this is just really, I try to be very clear, what do I have scientific evidence behind and what is more in the realm of opinion? It's informed opinion based on the science, but we don't have good evidence that we can say, this is the exact reason. But I think of attention as a kind of muscle. And when you use that muscle more, it gets stronger. And especially if you use it when it's hard to use it. It's like lifting a heavy weight and it gets stronger faster. When you don't use it, it atrophies and actually gets weaker. So if you've ever broken a bone, like you broke your leg and you're in a cast, your muscles are weak when you get your cast off because they haven't been used correctly. And you have to actually go into rehab and do things to try to bring that strength back up. The mass media are like the cast. I think of a better analogy, if we want to live in an analogy world, it's like those bumpers on bowling alleys.
Oh.
They put those bumpers in so you can't have a gutter ball. No matter where your ball goes, it keeps bouncing it back into the middle. That's what the media are like. They're constantly grabbing our attention, right? And one way of thinking about this is if you stand outside someone's house at night who's watching TV
Mhm.
or playing a game, doesn't matter. What do you notice? Well, you notice that the lights are constantly flickering. It goes darker, lighter, right? You see that flickering blue light. Every flicker makes you have to look. It triggers what's called an orienting response in psychology. It's a deep brain, very primitive, evolutionarily driven thing. If a shadow crosses you, you'd better look at it because it might be about to eat you. So every time the light flickers, we almost have to look at it. Similarly, if you stand in the next room when someone's playing a game or watching a movie, what do you hear? You hear the sound go low and then loud, and you hear sound effects, and then right again, those trigger orienting responses. Every time a twig snaps, you'd better look at it because it might be about to eat you, right? So what the media do is they do all these things that elicit attention from you. They suck it out of you. You don't have to pay the attention. You're not spending your attention. You're not efforting your attention. It's drawing it out of you. And so you're not using the muscle. It's the cast on your attention that sits there and kind of holds it in place while you do nothing, which is why we find it relaxing to sit and watch a movie or sit and play a video game, because you don't effort your attention. And so you can watch it, for 2 hours the same way if you did a 2-hour lecture, you couldn't keep your attention to it because there you actually have to spend the attention. You have to effort it, right?
Mhm.
And so I tend to think why we're seeing this negative long-term effect that the more media you consume at one, age, a year or two later, your attention deficit problem is worse because you've been sitting there with the cast on. You've got the bumper rails up the whole way, so you don't ever have to actually use the attention muscle. Now, is attention really like a muscle? Is this analogy apt? I don't know. I'm not an attention expert. It makes sense to me, and it seems to fit the data, but I can't say that's precisely exactly why this effect, why we see this effect in the literature.
Right. Uh, you've done plenty of research on media and video games just in general, and I mean that hasn't particularly tailored into ADHD, but do you believe that there are certain types of games, like particular games that tailor or benefit to these individuals more than others?
Well, the correct scientific answer is I don't know. Uh, but I could imagine that some games could be designed to actually help them. So if you take away some of the things that make them relaxing, right? So you actually have to put some effort into maintaining attention. That could help. I know there are developers out there who've tried to create games to help attention. I don't know of any research that shows whether or not they work. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't research out there. I can't read the entire literature, so I just
Mhm.
don't know. Um, but there's no reason why it games necessarily should have this problem for ADHD. And let me draw another analogy from the other media research. In television research, in the 80s, after MTV came out, and you're too young to remember this, but when it came out, it was full of music videos. That's the main thing it showed. And music videos are the way they're created, they're edited such that it's changing camera angle every few seconds,
Mhm.
sometimes more than once a second, actually, right? And so it's this rapid fire thing that triggers orienting responses, right? And it created what was called at the time the MTV effect, where all editing, movies and TV, started moving to this much faster paced editing. And that even got into children's television. Sesame Street shifted to that style because it is more interesting to watch, right? It holds your attention better because it's constantly you're sucking the attention out of you, right?
Right.
And after a few years, teachers started noticing that there was a change in ADHD problems among their young children in classrooms. And ADHD isn't usually diagnosed until later elementary school, the earliest,
Right.
but they started seeing it much younger in elementary school. And they started putting together this might be due to the fast pace of the show. And so Sesame Street, to its credit, heard these criticisms and shifted their strategy and went back to and if you watch it today, it has a long segment and then a short segment and then a long segment and then right. So they tried to counteract what they saw was a problem. So again, here's a place where if you're watching shows that don't do all this quick edit, don't have lots of sound effects, don't have lots of visual effects, but actually ask you to hold your own attention, that actually should help. Now, is there good research on that? No, not really. Um, but that idea, once again, fits with what research there is out there.
Right.
And so we could assume that you could create video games that would do that too. But will people play those games? I think you could. What I see in the industry strikes me as just a lack of creativity, right? It's easy to create a shooter game. It requires no thought whatsoever, right?
Right.
The mechanics and how to create that and why, right? It's, yeah, you put a little story around it and you make some nice graphics around it, but it's actually, there's very little creativity in that.
Right. It's usually the same principle all the time.
Exactly. Whereas coming up with a game like Animal Crossing, now there's one that actually seems to have pro-social, and may actually help with pro-social behavior and decrease aggressive behavior. It may, I don't know of anyone who's studied it with ADHD, but that's a nice slow-paced game that in fact might be beneficial for ADHD people. But I don't know of research on that. But again, it strikes me as it's certainly possible.
Right, because Animal Crossing, it's less about the comparative to the shooter because there's like several things happening on screen. You're saying that the attention is more likely to be locked in during that phase, but Animal Crossing, it sort of builds upon you having to do things a certain way in a certain timely fashion, being able to make your decisions about how things are in particular
Right.
about
But
your little
and
island.
those decisions don't need to be made split second either,
Hmm.
right? Am I going to go fishing now? It's after 10. There will be a type of fish out there that I couldn't get before 10. Yeah, let's go do that, right? That's not a decision that needs to be made very quickly.
Right.
Um, and so again, but you can see why that fast paced actually why people with ADHD would like it because it fits their information gathering style. It gives them enough in lots of different directions that they like that. And there is a fair research literature now over on media multitasking that's relevant to this too. And the classic study was done at Stanford where they brought in, so these are smart Stanford kids, right? These are higher than average people, right? And even
Right.
if they have ADHD, they are clearly high functioning with it, right? Because they got into Stanford.
Right.
um, and they brought them into the lab. They asked them questions about how much they multitask. They asked them how good they thought they were at multitasking, how frequently during the day do they feel like they need to multitask. And then they gave them a task where they actually had to multitask, actually have to be paying attention to something on the periphery and something in the center and right.
Right.
And what they found was the students who multitask more in the real world are actually worse at it. And the better you think you are at it, the worse you actually are at it.
Oh,
And and there are several studies now kind of confirming this type of result. And what we think is going on there is what multitasking trains you to be is more distractible. Constantly that you're very good at switching your attention.
right.
The brain actually can't multitask. The brain is not, unless by multitask you mean you can listen to me talk and be digesting your food. Yes, you are very good at that type of multitasking.
Right.
But if there was someone talking to you next to you and me, you can't listen to us both. That's
Right.
actually not possible in the brain, right? So the brain isn't a multitasker. The brain is a multi-switcher. We're very good at switching our attention. But every time you switch your attention, there is a little gap there for the time it takes to actually switch. And then there's a reorienting where you have to figure out what's going on over here and trying to bring your cognitive mindset to understand what's happening here. That takes time too. So the more you switch, the more you lose. And so this is why multitasking, you actually get your work done slower. You think you're faster, but no, just because, why do you think you're better? Because it feels busier.
Right.
You feel like you're doing more, but in fact, you're doing less and you make more mistakes. So you do your work more poorly. So what we believe about ourselves is wrong. And the more you multitask, the more you train, what they've decided is the more you multitask, the more you train your brain to be more distractible, more easily captured by things on the periphery. And so you can't actually, so that fits into this ADHD discussion too, that the more distractible you are, you're going to prefer doing things like multitasking. You're going to prefer multimodal things. You're going to prefer things that are constantly flickering and giving you information you have to pick up everywhere. But it actually makes you worse. It doesn't help you. It harms you in the long run, is the best guess from putting all this research together.
You talked a little bit about the development. There is development for video games as therapeutic tools for those with ADHD or like cognitive focus issues. How do you see the video games role evolving in the future for that type of treatment or support? You kind of went a little bit into it, but I kind of wanted to hear your full opinion where
Well,
that.
I don't know that I have a full opinion unless you spell that with two O's. You said you're getting all the dad jokes today. So here's my full opinion that therapeutic people, right? And I'm not one, I'm not a clinician. I'm not
Right.
trained as a clinician. No one wants me treating them for anything. I'm a researcher, pure and simple. But I think, clinicians are interested in this. And they are interested in these types of technologies. They are already using video game technologies for some types of things. For example, where I think they've made the most inroads into therapeutic setting is for PTSD.
Right.
And training people to so they often these are done in VR as well as just video games, but they put them back in, like, you take soldiers who have PTSD and you give them games where they can kind of control, still seeing a lot and hearing a lot of the things they heard on the battlefield that traumatized them, but they can do it in a much more safe environment, in a way that they can, dip their toe in for a while and then go a little farther and try and work with it. So those types of games are already being used out there.
Right.
With a lot of success. There are games being used in physical therapy clinics, especially like back. If you remember, the Wii had a balance board,
Right. Right. Right.
and that was being used in physical therapy clinics, and the games there, and a lot of games, a lot of movement games are used in PT clinics to help, because you are more willing, if you've got an injured shoulder, you're more willing to do this motion if you are playing a little tennis game than if the therapist is just telling you to do it. If you're
Right.
just telling you to do it, that you're much more cautious. But when you're playing a game, you're much more willing and you actually do a fuller range of motion. So I think there is already, it's been seen that they can be really beneficial. I don't have a lot of hope for it though. And here's
Mm.
why. We could be creating great educational games. And people have been talking about gamifying education for 20 years now, and yet it's gone nowhere and it's been not successful. And I'm old enough to remember what was called the computers in the classroom movement, where the goal was to have one computer in each classroom. Now it's a one-to-one, lots of schools are one-to-one, right? They
Right.
hand you a tablet in kindergarten nowadays, which is a terrible mistake, in my opinion. uh, but the research on the computers in the classroom movement is it made things worse. But what's good is a good teacher. And part of
Right.
what's good about a good teacher is you have to pay attention. You have to spend your attention to watch her and listen to her. So, and people don't like educational games. Why? Because they suck. You know, I don't, you probably know these modern statistics now better than I do, but a modern AAA game, the new Grand Theft Auto or whatever, probably has $100 million put into its development and marketing. An educational game is lucky if it has $50,000.
Right.
So of course they suck. They're not good because they don't get the development, they don't get the money, they don't get the effort, they don't get the talent put into them. And so no one wants to play them. And I kind of worry that's what's going to happen. Even if we came up with really good ADHD beneficial games, they're going to be low budget and not very good.
Right. The
Very
appeal is
engaging.
not there.
Right. So I'm skeptical that we'll ever get to where we actually have these at a broad scale that could be really helpful, but it's not because we couldn't. But you're gonna pay $80 for an ADA game? I don't think so. Are you gonna pay for the new what's coming out now? Grounded 2, which is kind of fun actually. Uh, yeah, you're gonna pay $80 for that, or the new Ark, Survival Ascended, or well, yeah. But if you got a game that says this is going to help your ADHD, I don't think you're going to pay $80 for it. So who's
Probably
going to put
not.
in? So who's going to put, let alone the millions of people you need to pay $80 to make back their investment?
We're coming up on a close right now for our questions, and so I feel like this question actually might be more beneficial to hear your answer from. Of course, with the ADHD topic and trying to find those benefits, of course, there is a wide plethora of research about how video games and ADHD sort of have a really bad balance, but that also delves into topics of gaming disorder and, just focus attention problems. How do you believe that parents can approach this topic? Like, what do you believe is the creative healthy balance?
Well, I think there's not a one size fits all answer, and that makes it tough.
Right.
Parents want to know how many hours a day should kids be in front of screens, or how many hours a day should we allow them play. There's not a one size fits all answer. There doesn't seem to be a tipping point number. What we see instead, particularly when we're talking about gaming disorder, or what colloquially people talk about as video game addiction, what we mean, what we scientists mean and clinicians mean by this is it's so far out of balance that it's damaging your life, that you are not able to maintain your schoolwork, your family functioning, your social functioning, your occupational functioning, your psychological or emotional functioning well anymore. It's actually harming you, right? And that's a very different level than just it's getting in the way of some things, right? And it's a very different level than it's making your ADHD worse. So it's, to get to that clinical level is a very high bar. And there are people who get there. It's, depending on the study, it's somewhere between 1 and 10% of gamers. The most modern meta-analyses seem to put it somewhere around 4 or 5 adolescent gamers. And that's a small percentage. It's not a small number of people when you realize, 90 some percent of adolescents game.
Right.
And so 4% of them, that we're talking about 1 million kids taking serious damage to their lives because of the way they're gaming. So it's a very important problem, but it is also an extreme, and there's lots of variation as you get up to that extreme. And where's the tipping point? It doesn't seem to be in how much. I mean, how much is certainly related. The addicted gamers certainly do play more on average than non-addicted gamers. One of the risk factors that makes you more likely to become an addicted gamer is ADHD. Why is that? I don't think we know.
Hmm.
But it certainly does make it more likely. Your odds are probably now higher than 4% for you because you've got that risk factor. And then there are other risk factors. Being male is another risk factor for
Right.
addiction. That's true for all addictions, not just gaming, by the way, substance and gambling.
Right.
Boys tend to There are many of these risk factors, and no one of them seems to be the cause of when you move into that clinically addicted level. But the more you have, the higher your odds get that you're going to get there, get into that. So what's the advice for parents is to pay attention. Are the kids' grades slipping? Are they giving up their friends and hobbies to just play games and just be with friends who game? Those are real warning signs that this is a bad trajectory. It doesn't mean there's necessarily a problem now, but you don't want to wait until there's a problem, because by that point they've damaged their grades pretty badly and they've damaged their relationships pretty badly. So you want to be trying to help them establish a balance. And I tend to believe that video game addiction is a type of impulse control disorder, that you should do your homework, but you just can't stop playing yet. You should go to bed, but one more level, right? So you can't control the impulse. If I'm right about that, and there are people who totally disagree with me, but if I'm right about that, it means you don't have to give up gaming forever, the same way you do with substances. If you were addicted to alcohol, you just can't ever have it on your tongue ever again. Why? Because biology. That's not the type of scientist I am, but it starts a physiological cascade that generally will overwhelm you again, and you'll be right back into the addiction. I don't think games are like a substance that way. There are people who think they are, but I think it is about, and the word you used is exactly the right one, finding the balance. How do you keep the gaming in balance with all the other obligations you have? And so you don't have to go cold turkey and never game again. Now, I may be wrong. There may be people that actually that is what they need to do. But my general belief is no, it's about trying to make sure you keep it in balance.
I must give a huge thanks to you for all of your, shared perspectives on this topic. I feel like there was a major great takeaway from this episode, definitely focusing into that part of the research and study that kind of analyzes the creative neutral of that topic. I do have to let you go because I know your time is up right now. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and share it with someone you feel might benefit from it. There are other interviews you can also look forward to in my linked social media and other platforms. If this topic interests you or you feel you have your story to share, feel free to email me or contact me. Once more, this has been Pixel Focus. This is Dr. Gentile, where focus meets play. Thank you so much, and until next time.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching the Pixel Focus podcast. If you enjoyed that episode, please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. Be sure to check out our socials and other podcast episodes.